And so you have to be genuine. And that's something that was missing for so much of my life was, especially when you're doing something that you have questions about. You're like, I don't agree with this. I don't, that doesn't make
Mm,
sense. And your skepticism is pushed down.
yeah,
And so that's
yeah.
just another thing I was
I think
thinking of.
that's really interesting because obviously your book is all about authentic leadership. So it's interesting that you
Yeah.
chose that as your topic, really being authentic
Yeah.
as a leader.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in a group like our old group, you it's very difficult to be authentic. Hello, welcome to Challenging Leadership. My name is Stephen, and as always, on the other side of the pond, I've got
I'm Jared.
great. So it's been quite exciting for both of us over the last few weeks,
Yeah,
Jared. So
absolutely.
tell me about your news first.
Oh goodness. Well, I had to go over to your neck of the woods, a little bit
Yes.
north into Scotland, but
Yeah,
I am now a happily married man.
that's right. Hubby
Yeah.
Jared. Great.
Yeah.
So you got married, was it 3 weeks ago now, was it? Something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. May 12th.
May
May
12th. Yeah.
12th. So it's been a little bit ago.
Yeah. So I saw some photographs. You both look beautiful, and
Thank you.
it looked very, very happy. So tell us about what Scotland was like and what the wedding was like.
Well, it was absolutely stunning. The best part was her, of course. I'm not just saying that because I have to, but I just immensely enjoyed the culture, the people,
Mm,
the food, the sights, the sounds. Everything was just, you learn a lot when you get yourself out of your normal every day to day, and of course the U.S. is so big, but you don't find Scotland culture
mm,
in the U.S. really, and
yeah.
we just enjoyed, meeting people. Went to a couple of pubs, got to see the Highlands. You
Mm,
name it, we did it. We try to stay away from a bit of the touristy stuff.
yeah.
We snuck into a, castle that wasn't like a public one, but it did have a
Mm.
sign up that said, "Hey, adventure at your own risk." So anyway,
Okay. You did? Okay, cool.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
it's fun. And she loved the sheep everywhere.
Yes.
And the sad bit came in where they said, "Oh, it's the lambing season." And I was like, "Oh, so these aren't sheep for wool. This is going to be
Uh,
somebody's dish later."
mm.
So it got
Yeah,
her a
that's always
little.
quite distressing.
She was like, "Oh."
Yeah,
So
I know, I know.
anyway,
Oh, lovely. That
yeah.
was great. So congratulations to you and your lovely wife. It was
Thank
good to
you.
have you over here. I didn't get a chance to see you, obviously, but the weather was good, which
Oh,
was,
not
you're
a bit
lucky
of
with that.
rain, which is
Yeah.
unusual, huh?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So we had a nice few weeks. Okay, well, and my news was my daughter got married.
that's right. Big
Um,
congratulations to father.
yeah, thank you. So we sort of week before your wedding was my daughter's wedding in Oxford. And yeah, it was an absolutely wonderful day. Just thoroughly enjoyed it. Very proud of Celine and her now husband Thomas.
Mm,
So yeah, that was a really exciting day. Very tiring, very emotional. Um,
hmm.
I got a bit over emotional at the speech, which I didn't expect. That
Oh,
caught me by surprise.
yeah,
But yeah, it was a lovely day. So yeah, we've had quite an eventful few weeks, which is part of the reason why we haven't really recorded anything.
that's right.
Um, so yeah. Anyway,
Very justifiable.
I think so. I think we can make the
Yeah,
excuse.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we've discussed this a little bit, Jared, and yeah, I guess we're getting a bit personal today,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we're
we
talking
are.
about our background. So obviously, you're from the southern regions of the United States. I'm
Yes,
from the UK, East Anglia, Cambridgeshire in England. Other than that, it would seem we have nothing in common, but we have something very, very sort of significant, I think, both to us in common, and
absolutely,
that's how we kind of
absolutely.
met. So,
Yeah, yeah.
how do
People
we
always
kind of?
ask me, "How did you meet this guy?"
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, "Why are you having a
yeah.
podcast with some guy over in England?"
This random bloke. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we sort of met on a different podcast that I was hosting at the time, which was really about the topic of high control groups being raised in a kind of strange environment which we'll get into. So I guess let's just come out straight away and say it. So we were
That's right.
both raised in a religious group called Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yep.
We'll name it. The purpose of that, though, isn't to kind of, well, we would say slag off the group or
Yeah.
the people that believe those things, but it did have a quite a profound effect on us individually, and then
Hmm.
obviously we met through the, I suppose, part of the recovery process, really.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I interviewed you on my podcast talking about that
Hmm.
process. So we
Yes.
thought we both came from this background, a background where we had no interest in business and being managers or leaders because of that, and yet here we both are as leadership and management trainers. So
Yeah, I
how
know.
did that happen? How did
Yeah.
our experiences shape us? And I suppose there lots of people have different sorts of starts in life. Not everybody has the perfect start in life. So there's something around how do you kind of reset your life and take it in a different direction. So I
Yeah.
noticed on my last podcast that I talked a lot, so I'm going to shut up
That's
now.
all right.
And
Hey, you had to get that bit out, but that's totally
yeah.
fine. But
So what
I'm,
do you
I'm
think?
glad you mentioned that.
Mm,
I'm glad you mentioned that about that because it's like I don't want this to become like, hey, this only applies to people that have exactly the same
exactly.
circumstances as us.
Yeah.
But I think that just through our discussion, we'll have an opportunity to help others appreciate, hey, just because this is how it started, it doesn't mean that that's going to define you.
Yeah.
But also, the thing that I want to put a positive spin on it is just because things may seem like they were bad, they also may have shaped you in a way you can
Mm,
use that
yeah.
experience to really do something great in your life.
Mm,
And I think maybe that's where I would start with. Once I got past the whole, I'm bitter or whatever,
mm,
I actually started to realize is like, well, wait a minute. There are some things, like what is that group famous for? Like, well, they're knocking a little bit on people's doors and
mm,
things, and I can remember doing that very early on as a child. Like I remember 8, 9 years old,
mm,
mom and dad having say, hey, go up to the door and tap on it. So you're talking to these complete strangers, and maybe you're the same way. It's like, well, I can talk to anybody now. Like I don't have a fear of speaking to a group or an individual. Don't have to know them. Sometimes that gets me into trouble. Like I can say, even in Scotland, like, why are you talking to these complete strangers? And I was like, she's like, that's right.
yeah.
You just talk to people, but that particular aspect of it where you almost we can't go into everything, we'd be here forever, but
Mm,
the idea of it's almost like a corporate structure the way that
mm,
that group is designed. So it almost helps you to be understanding of, I hate to say it, hierarchy and rules
yeah.
and things like that, but you can take away from maybe the principle of it and say, oh, I could use this in my
Mm,
professional life.
yeah. Yeah.
So
I think that's right. I definitely think things like public speaking, for instance, there used to be um, a very specific training course essentially within
yeah.
the organization that trained us how to speak. So yeah, I think that's a really good um, way of thinking about that experience. Is okay, what can we
Hmm.
take that's good away from it? I suppose we ought to just clarify why this is a thing. So if people are
Yeah.
not familiar with the group with Jehovah's Witnesses,
Hmm.
um, you might be thinking, well, so what? I was
Yeah.
raised a Catholic, or I was raised,
Yeah.
whatever, and so what? Well, I think the reason why this group is perhaps particularly challenging in relation to business and getting on in your career is that certainly when we were growing up, I'm a bit older than you, but I think we're probably similar experience. It was,
Yes.
don't have any interest in secular work. You have to
Yes.
go to work to earn
Yeah.
a living because you don't want to. Well, you need to. You got to earn a living. So
Hmm.
if a man doesn't work, neither let him eat was the
That's right.
biblical quote. So
Mhm.
you went to work to earn a living, but there was no interest in trying to pursue a career. And the reason for that was Jehovah's Witnesses have a very specific belief system that is, the world is going to end soon, that Armageddon
Mhm.
is coming any moment. And that means that any career that you have in the world will be a complete and utter waste of time. And actually, what you should be doing is serving God by full-time ministry, which is really knocking on
Mhm.
doors, like you've described, and that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the reason
Yeah.
why I think it's relevant to our conversation, because we were discouraged from any sort of interesting career and progression, anything like that was really discouraged, and further education, higher education, also very much discouraged because it's a waste of time.
Mhm.
This is not
Yeah.
going to do you any good. Was that your experience?
Absolutely, and it's interesting you bring that up because I think that's where maybe some of the frustration comes from is
Mm.
because here you're getting all these tools, as it were, things that you can utilize in order to be successful, but don't be successful. You've
Yes.
got you know we've got the screwdriver and the hammer and the saw in the bag, but don't use those. We just want you to look at the screw and maybe it'll go into the wall. No, through some divine intervention, everything will work out. But
Mm.
um, yeah, and so you were basically taught, as it were. Let's just be honest, to not think too highly of yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody likes a pompous, arrogant fool, but confidence is important. Confidence helps us to be successful. Confidence helps us to strive for better things. And when you have that taken away from you, even at an early age, it's a tremendous obstacle to overcome, especially when you reach your adulthood where you're
Mm.
supposed to have a career and take care of a family and yourself. And so you see there are some that they've been successful. Like I don't think being a Jehovah's Witness immediately removes the ability for you to be successful, but it sure does hamstring you, as it were,
Mm.
when it comes to the majority.
I think so, and there are one or two high profile people who claim to be Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm thinking of Serena Williams as the
Yes.
perhaps the main one. Incredibly successful tennis player, but I think one
Hmm.
has to remember that while she may have been raised in that environment, when she was doing her
Yeah.
career, she really didn't act
No.
as a Jehovah's Witness. And then when
No.
she finished her career, she sort of started to talk about it again.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's so that there's something there. There's quite a few what we would call experiences in the magazines where people used to
Hmm.
be incredibly talented at sports or perhaps music or entertainment, and they,
Hmm.
part of the experience would be how this person gave up that life
Hmm.
to serve God, and
Yeah.
so that it was highly discouraged. So I think that's something just worth remembering, and also
Yes.
different witness families would have slightly different takes on it. So it's not that
That's right.
every single Jehovah's Witness would never go to university, for instance. That did happen,
That's
but it
right.
was very rare,
Yeah.
and it was
Yeah.
certainly discouraged for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Same thing here. I think
Mm.
that's something that people don't realize is like they. I don't say they don't allow it because there are people that will do it. I think
Yeah.
it depends on who you are and the region you're in, but for the most
Mm.
part, it's highly discouraged for higher education. Once you get out of high school or an equivalent,
Yeah.
it's not like, oh, I'm going to go to university so I can have a degree. And I'm one of those individuals that
Mm.
I went straight into the workforce right at 18
Yeah.
without a degree of any sort because it just wasn't permitted.
Yeah, so I'm a bit older than you. We left school at 16. I left school at 16. If you could stay on what we call sixth form, which was 17, 18. And I actually
Hmm.
quite wanted to do that. But again, it was very much discouraged. Get a job,
Yeah.
earn a living.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so that's what I did. And I started work in a factory at a screen printers, which was a job I quite actually enjoyed.
Yeah.
But there was no idea of getting a levels, as we would call them, or further education. Certainly, no chance of a degree. Um,
Yeah.
so straight into the workplace at 16, and then what I did is I actually I left that job after 3.5 years so that because that the encouragement is to what they call pioneer, which is
Yes.
basically to do full time ministry. And so I gave that job up
Hmm.
and got a part time window cleaning job. Started my own little window cleaning round, and
You're not paid for that full-time ministry either, right? Let's
that's
just make
right,
sure everybody understands. It's not
exactly.
like you took on some admirable cause and got paid
No,
for it. No
absolutely. That's
money.
right. It's completely so your full time ministry, completely voluntary. So you have to make a living, and the only sort of way you could make a living reasonably quick in those days was something like window cleaning. You could
Yeah.
do okay over a couple of days. I was still living at home with my parents, so
Yeah.
overheads were quite low. But that was me until sort of 20s, really. So all of those, and it'd be the same for you. Those early years in your 20s, I think, are really important, aren't they? Because
Yeah.
they're a
Yeah.
time when you're building up your career. You're
That's right.
making a couple of progressions. Probably, you might start in at entry level, and you might make a couple of
Hmm.
progressions into early sort of leadership roles. And of course, none of that was was
No.
was there for us. And so I left when I was about 30. So at that
Hmm.
point, I was then sort of starting from scratch at that point.
Yeah. 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 I was thinking about that, how we kind of had to start at the back of the pack, but
Yeah.
then when the gun went off to run, you're still sitting there waiting, and then it was an individual decision, like you said. You said in your
Mm.
30. For me, I was 40, 42. So it was, it's interesting, you think about, you can almost have regrets like, man, if I
Mm.
just would have got started earlier, but
Yeah.
then I have to go, would I be the same person?
Mm.
Would I be successful? Because I don't know about you, but some of the experiences we had, it taught us to deal with adversity. It's not I mean, I think it's people look at it as like, oh, you're just a bunch of bothersome people that annoy us on Saturday morning.
Mm.
So you can imagine it as a young child, you got men, and we have guns in America, and I joke about
Yes.
that, but it's like I had guns pulled on me a few times.
No, really.
Yeah, I was like a
God.
10-year-old kid, and this old guy says, "Get the bleep off of our front
Wow.
porch," and imagine having that happen to you as a kid.
That's terrifying.
Actually, I know, and so I remember I was talking to one of my therapists one time about all this stuff. She's like, "You realize that's like severe religious trauma," and I'm like, "Really? I didn't even think about that." But
Mm.
I'm not expecting my clients to pull guns on me, but I'm just saying I can deal with some pretty rash situations and be
Mm.
like, "Oh, this is nothing. You
It's not
should
as
have
bad as
seen it.
having a
What I had to
gun
deal
pulled
with
on
it."
you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So the worst,
So
the worst we
I
had to put it
chuckle
with.
about it, but
Well, it's pretty serious. I mean, there's not much more
yeah,
serious.
yeah.
Dangerous dogs was the
Oh
worst
yeah,
thing we had to put up with, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Which wasn't that often, but yeah, I think you're right. It does give you a certain resilience, I think, to
Hmm.
deal with some of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, when I left at around 30, it took me a couple of years to kind of get myself into gear, if you like, to then identify what I really wanted to do with my life. At that point, I
Hmm.
was already married and I had a baby. We had a baby, so um, I sort of had a life framed out for me, but it was I wasn't quite sure what, other than obviously my family, what was I now going to
Hmm.
do with my life? What mattered to
Yeah.
me, and that took me a bit of
Yeah.
time. I don't know about yourself.
Yeah. I would say for sure. My interesting thing is not to get into some of the doctrinal things, but
Hmm.
when you leave, it's a pretty serious situation. Like for
Yeah.
me, that meant I lost contact with all my family and friends, like they
Mm.
because they practice this thing called shunning,
Mm.
and they're pretty rigid about it. But I had honestly mentally disconnected for probably about 5 years before I actually physically left. So honestly, what I did during those 5 years is I was being very methodical and calculating, how can I build up myself? How can I educate myself? How can I prepare for that? And I think the lesson there is that it's not really a good idea to do anything rash.
Mm,
I think maybe on the outside, people thought that was a completely rash decision, but I had been planning it
mm,
for
mm,
many years because of the fact that I knew what would happen.
yeah,
And also I didn't want to be told, oh, because you know what happens when you leave, you turn into a druggie and you're just,
that's what you're told, isn't it?
blowing all your money in Vegas
Mm,
and and I can say I'm pretty dang successful and I'm proud of that, but I didn't do it because of supposedly the magical sprinkle fairy dust that goes on you when you're a JW.
yeah, exactly.
Try not to be
Yeah,
too harsh, but you know what I mean.
yeah.
It's just it's like we each have our own skill set, and I think any of us can be successful, but you have to have a plan. Don't be rash. Think about it. That's true of anything, regardless of dissimilar situations.
I think that's right. And we wanted to make sure this episode wasn't too sort of internal about our own experience. So
Yeah.
we want to, I suppose, apply that to lots of situations. And yeah, I think that's a bit of good advice for lots of situations is to think what actually matters. What is important
Yeah.
to you, and I think that's one of the
Hmm.
things that it's definitely worth asking yourself that question before you jump into
Hmm.
something. Oh, well, maybe I should do this or
Yeah.
maybe I should do that. Ask
Absolutely.
ask yourself what is really important to me, what really matters, what makes me happy, um, and then on the basis of that, you can start to make better decisions about what you want to
Absolutely.
do.
Yeah, because I mean, you think about it, like you use the term high control
Mm,
organizations or groups. I mean, like, can't we apply that to businesses? Some of them are run like that, and
mm,
you may be a part of that. Those of you that are listening in, it's like, hey, don't do the dramatic. I'm out of here, and just throw your stuff in the trash and walk out the door. It's like you should have a plan. Like, what is it you want to do?
yeah,
And I think that's something I had to focus on. Okay, what next? And then what? And then
yeah,
what?
yeah,
And you have to ask yourself those things because, there's people that have been in really terrible situations. Maybe they've come from a background of poverty, or maybe they were abused in
mm,
a terrible situation at home. But it's like, how can they get past that
mm,
and be able to make something of themselves?
mm,
Use you got to use your hurt and your pain or your bad situation in life as fuel
mm,
rather than call it a ball and chain.
yeah.
Some people want to just tie themselves down to this is how it was 20 years ago, and they never want to let go. And I'm like, you have to let go at some point.
Yeah, that's right. So, can you think of any sort of mistakes you made? I can think of a couple of mistakes I made. I think
That'll
when
be
I
another episode. We don't have time for I'm like, can I think of a few? Sure.
yeah,
Go
uh,
ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
yeah, no, that you're willing to share, I should say. So yeah, for me, I think because I was so I my first what I would call proper career move was I joined a small training center, IT training center. So I became an IT trainer. I'd never
Mhm.
really had much exposure to IT. It wasn't like I was some sort of IT nerd. So I'd kind of learned how to use a computer, and about a year later, I'm training people how to use them in a college. And then I left that after a year and joined a bigger team, which was I was a support analyst on a help desk. And I was like 10 years older than everybody else because that is real entry level sort of position
Mhm.
that. So I was about 10 years older than everybody else in there. And I guess I became quite um, very focused, hyper focused on development and progression because I felt I was behind. I was trying to play catch up. And so I was quite aggressive, really, at times with my determination. And I made my manager her life a bit of a nightmare, I think, because I was
Mhm.
quite awkward and difficult to deal with. Because I just was. I had to have everything now. Things had to be right. Um, I didn't really understand the corporate
Mhm.
world. I had never been in it
Yeah.
really, so I think I made a lot of mistakes during that time, and I probably upset a lot of people with what I said and the way that I behaved. And I it took me quite a long time to learn from that, and then I learned about some communication skills and all those things that
Mhm.
I should have learned earlier. And I feel like I I feel like I it took me quite a long time to sort of develop away from that
Hmm.
awkward, difficult Stephen that I
Yeah.
sort of regret I was, but that is who I was for a while, you know?
That's right. Yeah. No, I could just say, well, that's exactly the same with me.
Yeah.
But I'll share one that I struggled with. The thing that I think about is I don't call it people pleasing, but very performance driven by trying to hit certain metrics. Like is a background. You said back in the day when you and I were in there, it's like, hey, 10 hours was this benchmark. You need to spend at
Yeah.
least 10 hours in the ministry or
Mm,
you're nothing, you're nobody. And so you would try to hit that number and you weren't concerned with anything else. And I thought about just as a person trying to establish a career and to move up, it was looking at certain metrics and ignoring others.
mm,
And what I mean by that is being overly concerned by what everybody else thought. We were always worried about what everybody else thought. And at some point, you have to say, well, what do I think?
mm,
Because critical thinking skills are definitely missing in that upbringing. You're not really taught to think for yourself. And it's so important as a business individual, as a leader, as a father, as a husband, whatever it is you're doing in life, you have to have that critical thinking skill set because there's not always going to be somebody there to tell you exactly what you should be
mm.
doing. You
Yeah.
have to be able to rely on your wisdom and your insight and your knowledge. I'm not saying all the time, don't be overly confident, but you do need to have that.
Mm,
And I just found that it took a while because there was always this voice in the back of my head saying, you know, you shouldn't be thinking this way. You're being too straightforward, or you should just sit back and let other people take the lead. And that took some getting used to. Like I
mm.
mean, even just as recently as this week, I had somebody says, "Well, you can make the decision here," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right."
Yeah.
So thanks for the
Yeah.
reminder.
Yeah.
So it's something you have to constantly work on, and don't let that again be something that defines you.
That's really interesting. I think that there's definitely a culture of submissive behaviour. In fact,
Yeah,
you're encouraged to be submissive, aren't you, as
that's
a
right.
witness?
That's right.
And
That's the
you're
great
also,
word. That's the one I was looking
yeah,
for.
that is the kind of the message, and literally it is the word that is used. And
Hmm.
obviously we're two guys sat here talking, but
Yeah.
for women, I would say it's worse. Women
Yes.
are told to be submissive um, to a much greater degree. That they have to be submissive to their husbands and to the men in the congregation as well. So I think it's even
Yeah.
worse for women. But also, I would say, the very name Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, certainly when I was at
Hmm.
school, um, the idea was to be a good witness. So not just the act of
Hmm.
witnessing, like talking to people
Hmm.
about God and trying to evangelize, but it was also about the way you behaved. So every single bit of behavior was like either a good witness or a bad witness
Hmm.
about the
Hmm.
religion. So you were kind of like a walking billboard.
Yes.
Um, and so I think that put an incredible amount of pressure on you to always conform, always do what you were told, not to make any waves. And I think that was one of the struggles when you leave is
Hmm.
how much do you kick against that? Like I said, I think I behaved quite badly at times, but then on other
Yeah.
occasions, you'll just go along with it because you are kind of conditioned to do that. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of rebalancing of your values and how you're going to behave in
Yes.
certain ways.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the other thing that I think about is, um, how to say this politely. I think maybe in human nature we have a tendency to be judgy, but they're extremely judgmental. Like, I can remember my grandmother. We're walking down a street, and it's like, well, they didn't listen. Maybe I'll move into their house after Armageddon when they're destroyed. And like you're
Yeah.
hearing this type of
Mm,
garbage when you're a child, and you start to go, but it almost indoctrinates you. So then, as you get older, you can be judgmental towards people. And that's exactly the opposite of how we should be as human beings because people have different backgrounds and experiences. So, what I've had to hyper focus on is being extremely empathetic towards other people because they would talk about being empathetic, but they're basically just trying to sell an idea. So they're just
Mm,
going to mimic or mirror whatever somebody has going on in their life. But I'm like, you got to go beyond that as a leader, and actually be genuine, be authentic.
mm,
And that's something that I've had to force myself into. I'd say over the past decade is don't just try to sell something. Be real, and they'll want to
mm,
buy what you have. Because I mean, as leaders, you're not, maybe you're not in sales. Most of us maybe not are, but I think we all are in a sense. Because when you're training and teaching, you're selling an idea. You want them to buy it, and so you have to be genuine. And that's something that was missing for so much of my life was, especially when you're doing something that you have questions about. You're like, I don't agree with this. I don't know. That doesn't make
mm.
sense. And your skepticism is pushed down.
Yeah,
And so that's
yeah.
just another thing I was
I think
thinking of.
that's really interesting because obviously your book is all about authentic leadership. So it's interesting that you
Yeah.
chose that as your topic, really being authentic
Yeah.
as a leader.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in a group like our old group, you it's very difficult to be authentic because
Yeah.
everything we're all obviously we're all affected by our social groups, and
Yeah.
that's part of how we develop our views. But
Hmm.
with a high control religion or any sort of high control group, you're basically told what to think. It's
That's
not
right.
about influence. You're told this is what you think about this issue. This is
Yeah.
what you think
Yeah.
about that issue. And then what you have to do is defend that especially when you're knocking on
Hmm.
doors or speaking to people. They might say, well, why don't you people celebrate
Hmm.
Christmas, or why don't you people have a blood transfusion? And then you have to
Hmm.
defend that position, whether you actually
Yes.
agree with it or not.
That's right.
And
That's
so I
right.
think that creates a very hypocritical and quite a false sense that you're performing, um, but is that really what you think and feel and believe?
Yeah, no, no, 100%. And maybe that's, I don't say the crux of it, but just how much of that influences us. I mean,
Mm,
goodness, it's such a big part of our lives. And I was laughing while you were talking. I was thinking about like something as simple as I really like this Led Zeppelin song. Oh, you're listening to Led Zeppelin? We need to talk to you, And it's
yeah.
like,
Mm.
and it's so freeing to go, I can like whatever I want. It's like if I say I like haggis, then whether you think that's good or not, I like haggis. I'm joking. I don't like it.
I thought you'd been converted while you've been in Scotland.
I haven't. It's like the old farmer told me. He's like, if you didn't know what it was, you'd love it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was
Did
like,
you
might be
try it? I
true, but it's
mean,
too late. Oh, absolutely. I
yeah,
tried everything. I had that. I did the black pudding.
yeah, yeah,
I just said I want to try everything, straight away, and I can
yeah.
decide. And maybe that's an analogy of whatever it is you're dealing with. And I always, me, I've got to bring food up, but it's like try it, and if you don't like it, it's okay.
Mm,
Whereas when we were younger, we didn't have the ability to say I don't like that,
mm,
or that
yeah,
makes me uncomfortable.
yeah.
And I think that's something we have to learn as leaders is don't make your people feel uncomfortable. I've been as a side note, I've been focusing on, there's this book called Strength Finder. It's a Clifton Strength Finder thing, and I don't agree with everything, but I do find it interesting that like focus on your strengths instead of trying to make your weaknesses
Mm,
better.
yeah.
And I'm not saying give up on your weaknesses, but then
Mm,
I was thinking, man, everybody who's listening in, I'm hoping they'll reach at least one person where you go, I'm really good at this. I should try to do something with that. And that's the thing, is the things we're really good at, unless it benefited that organization, then it
mm,
was considered rubbish.
yeah.
Unless it could help them out, oh, you're a bricklayer. Hey, come every weekend and help us, build another building.
Mm,
But don't be successful with a brick business,
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
so
True.
that's what I think I'm getting at
Mm,
is like we all have talents. Fine tune your talents.
mm,
Don't be afraid to try something new, and don't be afraid to say I don't like it.
mm,
Who cares if
yeah,
everybody else likes it and you're the one that goes I don't like it. That's okay. And I'm not talking about the stuff where it's like you're being a bad human, like prejudice and
yeah. Of
hatred,
course.
but it's like, but everything else is like, hey, You want to wear paisley bell bottoms? Wear your paisley bell bottoms.
I mean, yeah, I think, I mean that is something that as I've got older as well, I've kind of um, I've become much more at ease with the things that I don't want to do. So one
Yeah,
of the things that when you're in business, which I've now been doing for about 20 years, it's terrifying, really. But I've been my own boss. I've been a consultant for 17 years, something like that. Um, and obviously, quite a big part of any business is getting work, and that for me is the hardest bit. Actually
yeah.
doing the work is fine. I absolutely enjoy it, and I feel very comfortable with that. But despite my upbringing of knocking on doors and talking to complete strangers, I still find
Mhm.
things like cold calling incredibly difficult, and I'm
Mm,
just not very good at it.
yeah.
And the whole marketing and advertising side of the business, I've spent a lot of time and money and effort trying to develop myself in that area. Um, but over the last sort of 5 6 years, I've just come to realize that, you know what, that is just not my gig. It's just not my thing,
Mhm,
and I'll buy that
mhm.
expertise in. Um, and I'll get somebody else to do that. And actually, that works better for me.
There you
I'm going to
go.
focus on what I know I'm good at and what I
Yeah.
do. That's not to say I'll never do any sales and marketing, but I'm not going to waste a lot of time on that where I'm actually not getting any value from it. I'd rather get an
Mhm.
expert in to do that. So that's a good example
Sure.
of, we were not allowed to think that way.
No,
Everybody had
no.
to do it, didn't they? Everybody had
That's
to
right.
behave the same way. So it takes quite
Yeah.
a while, I think, to start to become a bit more at ease in your own skin and say, right, this is me.
Mhm.
This is how I want to live my life. This is how I want to do things, and
Yeah.
you start to become okay with that. I
Mhm.
was wondering, Jared.
Yeah.
Many of our managers that listen, our people that listen to this, might be managers and leaders in industry, and they may well have Jehovah's Witnesses who are um, team members.
Yeah.
Like we've already said, we were encouraged to obviously go to work. Some Jehovah's Witnesses are self-employed, but many of them do go into the
Mhm.
workplace. Sometimes they do progress a little bit. They're not really
Mhm.
encouraged to do that, but
Mhm.
um, they might, because they've been there a while, end up as a sort of junior team leader or something like that. Um, I think I've always found it's kind of difficult for other leaders and managers of those sorts of people to understand what their life is like, because
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't think my boss would understand what my life was like when I first
Yeah.
started work.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether there's any advice we can give to managers
Oh,
of
great question.
Jehovah's Witnesses in their workplace, because they do have a lot going for them. They're generally
Absolutely.
honest and pretty hard
Yeah.
working people, because that's part of their culture. So,
Yeah.
what sort of advice could we give to managers of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, wow, that's a great question, Stephen. I was thinking like, what did I wish when I was one that everybody knew, like to I don't know, to help or to help me grow or whatever. But I would say, imagine you have someone working for you that's moonlighting another full-time job.
Yes.
But this full-time job
Mm,
is not taking away from their loyalty to you,
yeah.
their
Mm.
hard work or their industrious. They're going to give you everything they can. They're going to
While
be
they're there.
great.
Mm,
Yeah, while they're there.
mm,
I was like, but they have to go home and just like you have your family and everything you're taking care of. So that's kind of like a sum zero because everybody's kind of got something like that going on. You've got your
yeah.
personal life.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, they have this job they're moonlighting at, and that is
Mm,
being a Jehovah's Witness.
mm,
That is a tremendous thing because those of us that go to church or whatever, it might be like, hey, I go to church on Sunday, and I tithe or whatever you want to call it, and I do my good thing or whatever. And
mm.
I'm not knocking that either. What I'm saying is theirs goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
I almost imagine the life of a actual pastor or minister who
Mm,
that's their job. That's what they all are, except for they're not being paid.
yeah.
And so they're under a tremendous amount of stress.
Mm,
They don't have any free time. Of course, that's a choice. So I'm not here to berate. It's like we all have to go. Well, I still chose it, even if. but I'm
Well,
saying, but
it's
I'm
a
saying in the same sense, it's like you
mm,
don't know. You don't.
yeah,
That's a tough one. I know. I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, I could have said it better, but I'm just thinking it's like they're doing what they think
that's
is
right.
the best. That's so they're they're like they're not going. This is terrible. Maybe they are. I don't know, but most of them are genuinely. I thought I was doing
Mm,
my level best, and so it's just a balancing act. And so I think just understanding that they do feel pressure, or and we have to be as leaders maybe beyond just that. It's like we have to be recognizing that people have different beliefs, so we have to be respectful of that. Whether we're a Christian, a Muslim, an atheist,
mm.
whatever it is, it's like in the workplace, those kind of have to take a back seat to the fact that we all respect each other. And that can get difficult, especially in today's political climate and things that we're
Absolutely.
dealing with.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, just we need to be empathetic towards individuals like that, because they've just got a whole other world going on, and it's not a double
Yeah.
life. It's
Mm.
they're genuine. It's just they've got a lot going on. So
Absolutely. So, for some of those, I know you were an elder when you were a
yeah,
witness. I was what's called a ministerial servant,
yeah,
which both of those things require extra work. So,
yes,
for me, it was like I would go and help with building projects, or I would help
hmm,
in the Kingdom Hall and prepare things in the
yeah,
hall. And for you, it could have also been a very pastoral role, which you might be
yeah,
dealing with some really difficult things. So you go to work
yeah,
during
yeah,
the day, you do your normal 8-9 hours at work, and then you come home. I remember as a child, you'd
hmm,
come home from school. My dad would come home, and straight away you're eating your meal, and then you're out to the meeting, or
yeah,
you're out on a Bible study, you're out on the field service that's knocking on doors. Um, and then at weekend you've got that as well. So yeah, you don't. They're not sitting in front of the telly watching TV every evening,
hmm,
um,
yeah,
and so they're struggling to unwind. I think they might be dealing with some really difficult issues. As an elder, you might be dealing with
hmm,
people's problems in the congregation, and you know, not really being equipped to do
yeah,
that because you've not had the
yeah.
training.
Got no
Um,
degree in psychology for sure.
exactly. So you're trying to do all this stuff, and then at the work in the workplace, you've got your day job, which you're encouraged to do to the best of your ability and work really hard at that. So I think that there's a real risk of burnout for some of
Yes.
those people, and I do know
Yeah.
people who really did burn out. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that point out about burnout, because the other thing is we're not supposed to complain.
Yeah.
We're supposed to just keep it shut in. And so if someone is going through burnout, you as a leader or manager have to look for the signs, because they're
Mm,
probably not going to tell you. I mean, that I
yeah.
think most people just aren't going to tell you anyway. But I think it goes to an extra degree with that upbringing, because you're just like, again, you don't want to be looked at as a bad witness. Oh, he's always
Yeah.
complaining,
That's
or
right.
or he's unhappy. So you just have to say, I'm happy,
Yeah.
I'm good, everything's fine. And that goes into the workplace. And you can be like, well, guess what, I guess everything's fine. But you have to look for those signs, and,
Mm.
and be, again, go back to being empathetic and understanding of what their situation is like, because they don't get a break.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember as well is that Jehovah's Witnesses are generally discouraged from having um, extracurricular interests. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
and in other words, that they're not supposed to associate with people in the world outside of necessary sort of
Yeah.
association. So, at the workplace,
Oh yeah.
they're friendly, they're lovely,
Yep.
they're honest generally, and they're nice people. But if you invite them to go out for a meal or something, or let's meet down at the pub, they're
Hmm.
probably not going to do that, or any sort of
No.
extra stuff like that, or charity work or anything like that. They're
Yeah.
unlikely to get involved in any of those things because they're supposed to keep themselves separate from the world.
That's right.
I
That's
think it's
right. That's
important
such
to
a good point.
remember.
Yeah.
It's important to remember if you're a manager or indeed just a colleague, it's not because the witnesses are being unpleasant, or because they
Yes.
dislike you, it's because essentially they're told that that's what they should do. So it's worth just being aware of that, I think, and not being offended when they
100%.
say no.
Yeah, yeah, because I wanted to go. I was like,
Yeah,
"Oh," and
yeah, I
then you
wish
have
I
to
could
come
do
up
that.
with a myriad of excuses and like, "Oh,
Yeah,
I'd really love to go to the pub," or "I'd love to go
yeah,
shoot some pool," or whatever, but
yeah,
I think, that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's a very, that causes stress. I can remember being stressed out anytime, "How am I
yeah,
gonna get out of this one?
yeah.
How am I gonna act like I care about people, but I can't go do this charity work?"
That's
It's
right.
like
Yeah.
it's very, very, very disheartening and stressful, so I'm so glad you brought that point up. That's very
And
helpful.
the other point I wanted to bring up is the transition. So we both
Mhm.
left the organization, and the organization. Lots of people were born into it. I was born into it. You were pretty much born
Yes.
into it, raised in
Yeah.
it. Um, so lots of people were raised in it. Their
Mhm.
evangelizing work brings some people in, but I think looking at the data, it's I'm not an expert on this. I don't look into it that much these days, but they're not increasing like they used to do. And there's a lot of looking at the Pew Research. Jehovah's Witnesses seem to be the highest in terms of people leaving.
Yes.
So
Yes.
lots of people leave. Lots of people who are witnesses now will leave at some point in the future. So again, there is a good chance that in your workplace you might have somebody who is leaving that religion, or indeed other groups. So other groups where they're very high control, it's all encompassing, and they're leaving that organization. During that transition, that can be very difficult. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that's like and how
Oh.
that might affect people at work?
Oh, absolutely. So you're going from this very controlled environment. You're in this bubble, as it were.
Mm,
And I think that the thing I struggled with the most was being so naive as to how things were outside of that bubble,
right.
for the good or for the bad. Things were actually I like it's better, but it's also so different. It's entirely different. Guess what? There's tons of honest, good people out there.
Absolutely.
There's no monopoly on that within that,
Yeah.
um, but you're still going to struggle with trusting people. You're going to struggle with just realizing that how do I say this? Like we are and I'm not a gamer, but people call this thing they call it a non-player character.
That's right. Yeah.
And what you'll realize is when you were in, you thought everybody was thinking about you and looking at you and analyzing you. And the real truth of the matter is nobody cares about you once you and I don't mean that that sounds terrible. Yes,
Mm.
people care about you, Stephen. But but you know what I mean? Like everybody has their stuff going on. And so once they're out of that, out of sight, out of mind, for the most part, they've got their own things going on. So don't be so overly concerned with what people think. Just
Mm.
keep doing a good job. Obviously, you got your job because you're a good worker. Don't fret over that. Don't be looking over your shoulder like I wonder what they're thinking. It's like because that's what we were taught.
Mm.
I'd be at an airport and thinking, oh, I hope somebody doesn't see me because I'm having myself a few beers at the at but it's like nobody cares.
Mm.
So the other thing is like there are so many support groups out there, and there are people that you can get that help from. And your healing journey or your journey is needs to be unique. Don't try to copy what somebody else did. You have to do what you think is comfortable. Um, that's kind of maybe my big advice because you can want to like I'll use myself as an example. It took me over 5 years to finally build up enough courage and have a plan to say, okay, now I'm going to do it. Um, when you do it rash, it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You may be totally unprepared and you may feel like, oh, I don't have any friends, I don't have anything, and then you may decide to go back, and that's again a choice. But just know that it's definitely not easy. I haven't spoken to my parents in 6 years now because they've
Mm.
chosen to shun me and my brother, and all of my best friends growing up with. My whole social circle was completely erased
Mm.
in May of 2019. Um, but that's something I knew was going to happen, and I just developed better friendships, I'll say, better relationships. Just know you have the power in your hand once you can get that into your mind that you have control. You have control. They don't.
I mean, that's great advice for people leaving, and I think as a manager of somebody who is going through that, just understanding that that's what they're going through, I think is quite useful.
Yeah.
Um, so there will be people all around the world, because this group, and again, there's other groups of a similar
Hmm.
ilk, and again,
Yeah.
it's not about their beliefs per se. It's the controlling nature of the organization that
Hmm.
we have a
Yeah.
real problem with. Um,
Yeah.
and so there will be literally thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions of people around the world going through various stages of this process of leaving. What
Hmm.
that means for
Yeah.
them is that they are trying to reorient their thinking about all sorts of beliefs and things that they thought they had a view on, but it was really told to them. So they now
Hmm.
have to work out, what do I think about this and that and the other.
Yeah.
They may well be having trouble with their families, because if their families are members, then they may well be shunning them or putting pressure on them to stay in the
Hmm.
organization. They might
Hmm.
also be going through a process called a judicial process, where
Yeah.
they are about to be disfellowshipped or removed from the congregation, as they call it now, which
Yes.
basically means that their other members of the congregation won't have anything to do with them.
That's right.
So this could all be happening in their home life, and they come to work, and
Hmm.
obviously they're still trying to do their job. So I think this
Hmm.
is incredibly difficult. I guess we're not asking managers to be counselors, but I guess just being aware that some of that stuff, if
Yeah.
they talk to you about it, even if they mention it, then that's the sort of thing that might be happening to them.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
it's useful to have a bit of an understanding of places for them to go. I mean, the International Cultic Studies Association is perhaps the easiest one to mention, because that's worldwide,
Hmm.
otherwise known as ICSA. There's a page there with lots of links to various different organisations that can support people and help people. In the
Yeah.
UK,
Yeah.
there's the Humanists, Faith to Faith, Faithless, and so on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so it's perhaps worth putting one or two things on our show notes for that. But just I
Absolutely.
think being aware, it's an area that I've thought about a bit. Is there any way I could help with that?
Yeah.
Because I work in organisations, lots of different ones, and
Hmm.
I know that in those organisations will be people who are either going through that or have gone through that. Um, there was a there was a particular woman that I knew when I worked at a big food manufacturing company. I was a trainer there, and she was on my training course, and she was quite a senior person in one of the sites. I was doing leadership training at that point, and she was on my course a few times. We spoke, and we didn't have a lot to do with each other, but she was, very competent person, and she seemed very nice. Um, anyway, a few years later, I heard a news item about her husband talking about how him and his wife had left Jehovah's Witnesses, and he
Mm.
mentioned her name, and it was this woman that I'd known,
How
and I
about that?
didn't even realize it. And
Yeah.
it and
Yeah.
unfortunately she died. She
Oh,
tragically she died very young. And I kind of always feel like I regret I'd not been able to talk to her about it. So there will
yeah.
be people in your
Mhm.
organization who are going through that, or they
Yes,
may well be
that's
something
right.
like that. So I think just being aware of that is probably quite useful.
100%. I agree 100%. And, you know, if anybody's maybe somebody's listening in that's in that situation where
Yeah.
they're thinking about, I'm thinking about they're leaving,
Mm,
not just for leaders, but those that perhaps may listen. This is like, it'll be okay, I promise you.
yeah.
You just be patient with yourself more than anything else. And there's different stages. And I was thinking for them, or even for the leaders, you're going to see somebody, maybe they like, why are they so angry? And I'm like, you're going to have anger, you're going to have
Mm,
sadness, you're going to go through a full range of emotions. But once
yeah.
you've gotten, I don't say get past that. Do we ever get past anything? Most of it maybe, but there's still going to be times where it comes up, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But just find your strength and focus on that. And it doesn't matter when it happens. I always thought about like KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. I think there's some even in the UK.
Oh yes, we
I
have
know
KFC over here.
and
Yeah.
there's okay. I'm not saying it's a good food choice, but what I'm saying is the founder of it. I think he was in his 50s when he finally
Mm,
became successful. So it's like, don't think that like you've got to. It'd be great if we could start in our 20s on a path, but that doesn't happen for everybody. But don't think that all is lost. You can be super successful. The founder of McDonald's, another one that was older. There's lots of good examples there. So, and then also what I would shout out to our female listeners is you have to put that behind you in the sense, and it's so hard because you get held down so much there,
yeah.
and and I don't have I'm going to unabashedly say this is a very misogynistic
Mm,
way of thinking in that organization,
mm,
and and just know that you can be just as successful or even more successful than your counterparts that are males. There's nothing that can hold you back. The world in general is very accepting, and they're much different in their viewpoint than what I think we see within
mm.
that organization. So you have to get out of that bubble to realize, oh wait, I can do this. I can go to school. I can be an engineer. I can, I can be super successful. I'm just saying, believe that, know that it's true. That what you had in the past is not what's reality.
And you can be a leader. I think that's the
Yeah,
thing. You
yeah,
look at
absolutely.
the Kingdom Halls where I grew up. The majority actually were women, and yet they had no ability to lead, so they couldn't lead in the organisation. Whereas,
Cleaning the bathrooms was about as good as it
yeah,
got.
exactly, yeah.
Mm,
So,
yeah,
and I guess that's a wider lesson to perhaps finish
yeah,
on is
yeah.
don't allow those other people, those externalities, to determine for you what you can do and what you want to do and how you want to progress. Um,
That's right.
in a small way, I don't think we had it as bad as many. We've already mentioned, I think women
Yes.
had it worse, but still,
Hmm.
in a small way, I think we've been able to demonstrate that yes, you can leave as an adult,
Hmm.
you can change your life, you can change your direction, and you can change who you are and what you do
Hmm.
and progress in the direction you want
Yes.
to get to. So it is possible.
Yeah.
It does take
Yes.
effort. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, you're quite right that it will be okay.
Hmm.
You can do it, I suppose, is the slightly bumper sticker version of that,
Hey,
really.
I'm all for that. That's great. It's true. It's true, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Like you said, it's not just a witness thing.
Mm,
We are always going to have people in our life that'll tell us, "Oh, you'll never be
that's right.
successful," or "You
Yeah.
can't do this." It's like, don't listen to that garbage.
Yeah.
You can blaze your own path. It just takes
Absolutely.
some determination and patience.
Absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, I've enjoyed that
Yeah.
chat. It's a bit different
Yeah.
to the sort of stuff that we normally do. We may well come back to
Loved
this
it.
topic. I think it's interesting, and I think it's interesting perhaps how our views on leadership have evolved, or maybe in
Hmm.
some cases stayed the same. Based on
This is true.
those sort of attitudes we had as younger men. So we could perhaps
Yeah.
revisit that at some point.
Absolutely. Hey, very good.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that, Jared. Don't forget, if
Thank you,
you're
Stephen. Enjoyed it.
listening to this podcast, to like and subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. And yeah, tell other people about the podcast. We really want to get to talk to as many people as we can. And that's the hard bit on podcasting, is
Yeah.
trying to get out there, trying to get listeners. So please don't forget to do that. Thanks. Bye for now. See you next time.
See you. Bye.